I had this voice light up in my head, and I heard these words. And the words were, if you want to be happy, it's up to you. Whether it was my intuition speaking to me or just some inspired thought that came literally out of nowhere, there's something really important that happened in that moment. I thought a thought that I had never thought before, that somehow it was my job, that I was the only one who could actually create happiness, joy for myself. All right, welcome everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This has been a long time coming. This is something that I have thought about doing, creating a podcast to showcase women and their experiences, their journeys, their trials and tribulations, as well as their successes, their achievements, those silent moments in life that seem to go unnoticed because they're wins and victories that happen just for ourselves, those moments of overcoming obstacles, those moments of transcending limiting beliefs and perceived barriers. I am surrounded in life by women who inspire the heck out of me. And I believe that when we share our stories and when we really take the time to listen to each other and to hold that space for each other, that we see we are so much more alike than we are different. And not only that, but we realize that the struggles that we go through, as unique as they are to each one of us, it seems to me that across the board, we have a lot of the same struggles. We have a lot of the same fears, worries, doubts, uncertainties, feelings of unworthiness. And at the same time, this beautiful potential exists inside every single one of us to overcome, to challenge those limiting beliefs, to see ourselves to the other side of what appear to be these huge chasms in our life, where we might look from one side and say, I have no idea how I'm going to cross this gap. I don't know how to get to where I want to be from where I am right now, but there must be a way. That part of us that doesn't give in, that part of us that won't allow the doubt to overtake us. And don't get me wrong, I've had doubt overtake me more times than I can count in my life. And at the same time, there is this part of us that can go so much deeper and further. And that's the part that I want to awaken, inspire, speak to, connect with as we go through this podcast. So this podcast, this is the first episode. This is episode 1. And this podcast is She Rises. And it's going to be stories about women. I feel that right now in my life, I am beautifully surrounded by incredible and amazing women whose stories inspire me, uplift me, and I have seen what the power of potential is in each of us when we activate it and actualize it and really start to believe in it, not just giving it lip service, but actually saying, what if I was to follow up with this belief with action? What if I was to lean in when there's no evidence that I can create what it is that I said I wanted to create? There's zero evidence. And yet I show up anyway, and I show up with my heart on my sleeve, and I show up in difficulty and in challenge. And that's when we start to build this deep, deep stoking of a fire inside of us, this fire that we can rise out of and that we can create amazing lives from. And so I'm really excited to be connecting with women through this podcast. Sometimes it's going to be just me who's talking to you. And I'm Krista. My name's Krista Danaluz Vieira. And right now I'm sitting in Yoga Rise. This is my home-based yoga studio. So I'm going to tell you a tiny little bit about myself. And this is a little bit of a vulnerable share because I don't usually put my whole personal story out there. So I'm going to give you the Coles notes, mostly just so that you understand a little bit about who I am, why I do what I do, and what inspired me to get to where I am today, to do the things that I do today. I would say that in this moment in life, my one biggest passion, the thing that I have been focused on for the past few years is supporting and championing women to believe in themselves, to uphold space for themselves, to step into their highest potential. And I feel this way because in my own life, I have deeply wanted to challenge any limitations that I have perceived myself to have. And I've wanted to do that because it's been very important to me to understand why I'm here. Why am I here on this planet? This is not, I think, a unique question. I think many of us at some point or another have dived into this. And if you are a friend of mine, you know that my conversations can't stay on the surface for very long. I just have to go right off the cliff and dive down. So this is really the premise of my relationship with myself. So let me take you back in time. When I was 11 years old, I was in a car accident. And that particular accident changed every single preconceived notion that I didn't even know I had about the universe and about life on earth. I don't think up until that time, I wasn't like a child who thought philosophical questions or anything like that. I was just a normal kid living my life and experiencing life the way most of us do, through play and friendships and, all of those things that you kind of take for granted. And when that happened, it completely turned a few things upside down. The first thing was that nothing was guaranteed. And that ricocheted and reverberated throughout the walls of my life in every possible way. My friendships weren't guaranteed. Waking up and having family members there tomorrow was not guaranteed, because that was something that I lost. My father and my older brother both passed away in that accident. The reality of going to school and feeling normal, that was not guaranteed. And it literally rippled into every part of my life. I realized I didn't know what was possible. I had not considered the fact ever that I might wake up one day to a completely different world where half of my family was missing. That thought had never occurred to me. And in all honesty, how could it have? I was 11 years old. And so it really showed me that there were things at play, that there were forces at work that, yes, I had heard of them happening. I had never considered that it could possibly happen to me. So in that instant, my worldview was shattered. And it was a very transformational shift. So a month passed after that accident. My younger brother and I were both in that accident, and we both survived. My mother was not in the car, and she gathered up all of this incredible energy and love and courage and just wrapped these loving arms of support around my brother and I. Whew, there's the emotion. And I will just say, the amount of admiration and love and respect that I now have for my mom as a mom myself has gone through the roof. Like, I think at some point as you get older that your parents do a lot for you. That there are things, and I know that every family dynamic and every family situation is different. So I'll just speak for myself, but I kind of knew as I was, going through my later teenage years that my mom had done a lot for me. But I will say that it's really only in the last 10 years where my appreciation has just gotten deeper and deeper and deeper. And I've seen the layers of support that she wrapped around me. With all of that being said, what I can say is that, we were able to continue on as normally as possible. And of course, there was nothing normal about it, except that this is what many people go through. People go through loss. People go through difficulty of, whether that loss is losing family members or losing jobs, or they go through some sort of experience, a traumatic experience. And a trauma is basically where something happens that creates an imprint in us that stays with us throughout our lives. Whatever that experience might be for you, a very emotionally impactful experience that shapes who you are. That experience shaped who I was in many ways. So I went off of the track of being Krista, who was, in grade 6, lots of friends, pretty normal kid, good at school, all of those things, to being really in an isolated space in my mind where I could no longer relate to anyone. And that really shifted things. I started to get bullied. I started to get shunned from social circumstances. And I don't even, now looking back, I do not blame anybody for the way that they treated me in school. I think it's very hard to relate to people who've gone through trauma and gone through loss, especially when you're only 11 or 12 years old. How do you hold space for a friend when you don't even know what holding space is? You've never had to do it before. This is so alien, this loss, this trauma. And so I think that experience really started to shape things. I had to dig really deep into who I was. Now, that didn't happen overnight. I went into a very, when I look at my teenage years, I call them the poor me years, because I was just in this, and I'm laughing while I say this, because I think as teenagers, I think we all go through some strife as teenagers. There's just no way kind of to go through teenagehood completely unscathed, because we're all growing and transforming and, trying on different identities to figure out who we are. And we're experimenting and we're building independence and we're, trying to find the boundaries and the edges of who and what we are. And so for me, that was a really interesting time, because I just went into this deep depression. I think now I can authentically look back and call that a period of time where I was really lost in my own suffering. And I thought, now looking back, I would say that I thought the world needed to change, or the world owed me something. I felt shortchanged by the world. I felt like it should be different than how it was. And the reality is that the only thing that ever needed to shift was my own perspective, but I didn't have the tools or the understanding to be able to initiate any of that kind of change. So there is a moment that I talk about when I run I do some weekend events now that are called Elevate, and they're all about women coming into those spaces and starting to assess what it is that they would really love in their lives, looking at where they are, where they would love to be, starting to create an identity and a pathway toward activating that. Because I truly believe we all have this deep latent potential where we can activate a life that not only do we love, but that feels, when we look back, that there's nothing that we regret. We would not live our life any differently. And so in this event, this Elevate event, I talk about this moment. And when I was, and I don't really know, I think I was 18 or 17, I was sitting in a coffee shop. I was sitting by myself. I had moved out of my house at this point. So there was a period of time there where I really struggled at home. And so I had to leave. I had to do everything myself. And I realize now that a big part of my trauma response is I have the flight. I run. I ran across the country when I was 20 years old. I ran from a lot of circumstances, but I'll get into that in another podcast. But in this moment, what I did was I was sitting there and I was by myself. I was in this coffee shop. I felt very alone. I remember I had no friends with me. I was very artistic at the time, in the sense that I was creative. I would cut out all of these clippings from magazines, words, pictures, and I would turn them into scrapbooks. And so I had many scrapbooks in my life at that time, and these words were inspiring, or they were something I resonated with. And I would just mix it together with all of these pictures, like landscapes, pictures of people, like moments in time, things that really not just inspired me, but also spoke to that part of that brokenness that I felt in my soul. And I'm sitting there by myself, And I can't remember what I was feeling exactly that moment. I was probably feeling sorry for myself. And in that moment, I had this voice just light up in my head. And I heard these words. And the words were, if you want to be happy, it's up to you. And I literally felt like a bomb had just been placed in the center of the table, like something untouchable, something explosive, something I didn't even know what to do with. And whether it was my intuition speaking to me or just some inspired thought that came literally out of nowhere, there's something really important that happened in that moment. I thought a brand new thought, like I thought a thought that I had never thought before, that somehow it was my job to make myself happy, or my responsibility, that I was the only one who could actually create happiness, joy for myself. I'm not sure that I realized this at the time, but up until then, I had been living as if the world owed me something. I lived as if somehow it was up to the world to make me happy. It had taken my family. It had destroyed the family that I had. It made me feel like I wasn't enough. There were all of these things that had come, and I just felt like it wasn't supposed to be that way. I felt like I had been wronged by the world in some way. This was my 17-year-old brain feeling unjustly thrown into this basic nightmare. And all of a sudden, there was this new information where I was the one who could shift this. I was the one who could empower myself to think differently, to initiate happiness. The very next thought came with this feeling of weight that just landed on my shoulder. And the very next thought was, oh my God, it's all up to me. And I felt this huge responsibility. I felt this huge weight. And I felt almost overwhelmed by the potential that somehow this was going to be up to me. Like I had to do this. I had to, if I wanted things to change. So like in that moment, it was like a light bulb went off and I could not unthink the thought. I could not unsee what I saw. And what I saw was that the future, my trajectory, my emotional state of being was entirely in my hands, and I couldn't deny it. In that moment, how I was feeling, how I was going to be feeling the next week, the next day, the next year, that was my responsibility, my choice. And I had never considered that I had a choice in it before. I had never considered it. I literally felt like the circumstances around me were creating how I felt. The circumstances around me were determining, should I be happy or sad? You know, there are people, when you ask them in daily life and you say, how's your day going so far? They'll say, oh, so far, so good. And what that can also translate into is that, hey, up until now in the day, it's been great. But if something happens that I don't like, my day is free to go to crap, right? It's entirely dependent upon circumstances and upon how people treat me, whether or not my day is going to be a good day or a bad day. Maybe you know what that feels like. Maybe sometimes that's where you're coming from. For me, that's entirely how I was living. But in that one moment, with that one thought, it removed my ability to say that. I now had this realization in my consciousness that if my day ended up being a bad day, there was some responsibility I was going to have to take for that. I couldn't blame something outside of me or someone else for me having a bad day. That was new information. Short story, to shorten the story, 6 months later, I had a very similar but entirely energetically different thought. And that thought was, thank God it's all up to me. The shift in suddenly taking that responsibility translated into me moving the needle just a few degrees. And by the needle, I mean my trajectory in life and how I was relating to my life started to shift from the inside out. I started to look at my behavior. I started to look at my relationships. I started to look at my actions. Like, what am I doing in the world right now? What are the things that I'm participating in? What have I made agreement with in my life? You're probably familiar with the book by, I think it's Miguel Ruiz, that says the 4 agreements. What am I making agreement with in my life? I didn't have that terminology at that time. I didn't have that context, but that's what I started to question. And there were relationships I had that weren't serving me. There were relationships that were reinforcing the lowest frequency of me. And by frequency, I mean, if you refer to Dr. David Hawkins, he's got the map of consciousness where he puts in emotional state. So grief, sadness, joy, peace, neutrality, whatever it might be, bliss, shame. And he gives it an emotion, he gives it a frequency. And there's a scale from the bottom all the way to the top. And every single of these emotional states that we can experience in us, they all have this relationship to a frequency. And obviously, the higher the vibration, the better you're feeling, the vibrations start to increase in positivity as you go up this scale. The other thing that he will say about this is that as the higher that you go up this scale, the more people around you bring up the scale with you. When you raise your vibration, the vibration of everyone around you starts to have the potential to rise up as well. Your higher vibration impacts the vibration of other people. Well, at that point in my life, I had people in my life who were really reinforcing lower frequencies in me and lower vibrations. And again, I take full responsibility for that because that's just who I was at the time. And that's what I had chosen to surround myself with. People who reflected back the pain and the anguish and the grief that I was feeling. So if I'm surrounding myself with that, how am I ever going to transcend? How am I going to step out of that? So I had to make some changes in my life in terms of what I was surrounding myself with, my environments, what I was focusing on. And that was the time in my life where I actually started to do meditation. So I had never done meditation before. I didn't know meditation. I actually remember in high school that I had a group of friends who had gone to a yoga class one time. I hadn't gone with them. And when they went to this yoga class, they told me about it after, and they just said they couldn't stop laughing and that it was really funny. And they just had this, it seemed like they just couldn't take it seriously, whatever it was, but I still didn't even know what it was because I had never done yoga and the word meant nothing to me. But at that time, I really started to lean into meditation and I started to lean into who I was. So at 19, I had this huge revelation that I didn't know who I was from behind my eyes back through my head and from my eyes down through my body. I was so disconnected from my body. I had this body shame. I had a really dysmorphic image of my body, who I was, like all of these things. And I think many of you can probably relate to having a very evolutionary relationship with your body where it's gone through a lot of different stages. And this was my experience at the time, was that I just didn't have a relationship with my body at all. I wasn't aware what it was capable of. I didn't know what it was designed to do. Like there was just no connection at all. I also really didn't know who I was as a being. The idea that my mind and my awareness, consciousness inside of my body were not the same thing had never occurred to me. And so that was again a moment where I was able to start sitting in meditation. And like many people, when you start meditation, the first thing I noticed was how darn busy my mind was and how all over the place it was and chaotic, and the thoughts, oh my goodness, like it was a stream of a barrage almost torment, because it was so many things I didn't want to hear or know. And so my first experience of meditation was me pushing the thoughts away and trying to silence them. And after probably a year or two, that's where I started to say, okay, what if I just sat with it? Like, what would happen if I just gave space and just, what if I just be? And I sit and I notice and I observe. So at this state in time, I had a lot of friends start to come into my circle who reinforced who I was as a thinker or as a philosopher. That was something I had always done throughout the teenage years. Was I used to write poetry, I used to write philosophy. I was very into the who am I question, but hadn't really gone deep into that. So I ended up in university at the age of 18 for social justice and peace studies as a double major with philosophy. And I had no idea what I was going to do with that, and I didn't finish it. So that didn't end up amounting to anything in terms of a career, except for it's inspired a lot of what I do now in my life. However, in that moment, I was really going into a lot of this inquiry and questioning. And so I was really coming at my mind from a place of analysis and from a place of a spiritual or psychological, philosophical understanding. I just wanted to know who I was. And I almost started this quest, this personal quest to say, what is it that lasts? What is it that's real? What's the one thing that I can depend upon in this life that is always going to stay the same? What is something that I can rely on and trust? Because my experience up until then was that life was impermanent. You don't get to take anything for granted. You don't get to take anybody with you. Everything that you create has the potential to be destroyed. So what is the meaning of life? And those were the questions those were the statements and the thoughts that were plaguing me in my mind at that time. So this invitation to go deep into philosophy, I started to have these friends around me. And I started to read. I was a book avid. Like I had so many books on my bookshelf everywhere. I moved like 25 times in the next 5 years around there. I moved so many times, and I would cart these boxes, banana boxes. Like, at the grocery store, you get these these big boxes of bananas that come in. You can see them piled at Superstore or wherever, and they've just got, bananas still in the box. I had 3 of those, and they were full of books, and I would just cart them everywhere I went. They were the bane of everyone's existence who helped me move. But all of that to be said, I just started to dive in deep, and I found Ram Dass, who wrote the book Be Here Now, and I found Ramana Maharshi, who has a book there called Talks with Ramana, and I started to go deep into reading about spirituality and non-dualism, and wanted to really understand who I was, why I was here. And that's when I started to do yoga. And I remember the very first time I did yoga, I was in a park. I was with a couple of friends. One of them happened to be a yoga teacher, and I didn't really know what we were doing, but I bent over to touch my toes at some point, and I couldn't touch my toes. I couldn't reach them. And I thought to myself, what the heck? Like, I was 19, I had done sports through high school. I wasn't inactive or anything like that. And yet I hadn't really done anything since I had gotten out of high school, which I think, maybe you can relate to. And this was something where it was like, holy crap, like my body, I don't have a relationship with my body. I don't know how to move it. I don't know what it's capable of. It isn't flexible anymore. And I realized that was not how I wanted my body to feel. It wasn't how I wanted to be. And so I got really interested in the physical movement of the body and in putting myself through a certain amount of difficulty, not because I wanted things to be hard and not because I wanted to punish myself or torture myself. It was because I wanted to see what I was capable of if I just stayed in the discomfort, if I went to the edge of my comfort zone and really explored that edge. I found a piece of myself there. There was a piece of myself that was waiting at the edge of my comfort zone that couldn't be activated or realized until I stayed at the edge long enough to light it up. That's what I found. And I became very fascinated with that in all aspects of my life. It wasn't a physical journey for me. It was very much more about the edge of my mind. What had I not considered? What was I still uncomfortable with? What had I not thought about yet? What was I avoiding? And I started to ask myself so many questions. And I literally feel like Pandora's box just got blown off, like the lid flew. Every question I had never asked myself, I started to ask. What I also want to say is that in this period of my life, I realized that through the experience I'd had as a teenager, and even before then, there were things that I had done that I wasn't proud of. And there were people I had hurt. I was also hanging on to a lot of grievances of people who had harmed me, things that had been said, things that had been done, circumstances I felt were unfair. You could go on with this list, but I'm sure you can intuit some of what I'm saying here. And I went through a few rounds of really, really deep, intentional forgiveness. I forgave myself everything I had said and everything I had done, which was no easy task because there was a lot of shame, there was a lot of guilt, there was a lot of self-hatred and self-loathing. There was guilt just for being alive. There was survivor's guilt for having outlived my older brother who had passed away at the age of 13. There was this feeling that I didn't deserve happiness. I was unworthy of joy, of lasting relationships, of people who loved me. So just think about how, if you can relate to any of that, think about how pervasive those beliefs about yourself can really be. And I started this journey of forgiveness to release myself from the hold of what that was doing to me subconsciously, consciously. I wouldn't have had the terminology at the time to say that, but that's what I felt I needed to do, was to go through and completely, without reservation, forgive myself. And then I went through the people in my life who really mattered to me. And I forgave them as well. And I went through the people who didn't even matter to me, that I had been holding something against because of something that had been said or done, or something that had been really difficult that I had gone through, or a way I had been made to feel, that I had made myself feel through that interaction with them or through that circumstance in life. I forgave life, for being difficult, for being fraught with moments of joy and moments of suffering, things that are really out of life's control, that we are going to experience a full gamut of existence. And there is nothing that can protect any of us from going through some of the difficulties and some of the hardest moments we will ever go through. As we are human beings on this planet, we are bound to go through great difficulty. And there's nothing that can be done about that except to learn how to embody our deepest self, our truest self, our most authentic self, as we journey through that to the best of our ability in that moment in time, which for some of us might be 11 years old or 6 years old or 60 years old. And for each of us, it's going to be a challenge. There are going to be things we're going to have to find out about ourselves. There are going to be edges we didn't know we would come up against, and we have no idea how to get to the other side. But this is part of the journey. And don't get me wrong, the other side of this journey is that there is bliss, and there is joy, and there is peace, and there is so much beauty. And we also have these great difficulties that we have to face, each of us. And there is no one person who is exempt from this. It doesn't matter where they were born. It doesn't matter what their job is or what their life is like or what their circumstances are. We all have a story. We all have experiences that have shaped us and that we are going to have to go through at one point or another. And these obstacles hold within them gems of revelation and gems of expansion that cannot be seen at the moment when that challenge, that difficulty, that catastrophe hits. We cannot see the gem yet. And it may be years before we're able to come to the other side of it and see how it was happening for us, if we ever get to that point, or if we can ever find that gem inside of it. I now believe that it's there, but I just want to say that everyone's experience is very different. So we all have this journey, and we're all walking the path in front of us, and it's going to look very different for each of us. But that forgiveness that I went through completely changed me. And 6 months later, guess what? I had to do it again. I realized that I still had resentments. I still had limiting beliefs. I still had anger. I still had things that I was afraid of. I still had this deep, pervasive sense of loss, like the world was ending type of loss, this sadness inside of me. And I had to go through this forgiveness again. And I did it at least one more major time after that, before forgiveness just became a part of my in the moment processing. But that hugely changed my perspective, because there was this massive release of energy. I was no longer hanging on to struggles. I was no longer hanging on to perceptions of other people that weren't true and weren't real in the moment. I was no longer hanging on to things that had been said and done in the past. I was taking all of, we say that when you're hanging on, you've probably heard it said that when you're hanging on to something, when you're hanging on to a hurt, or you're hanging on to a belief, or anything that's harmful, somebody said something to you and you won't let it go. It's almost like you're poisoning yourself over and over and over again. Every time you think that thought and feel that resentment or that anger, that sadness, or that whatever the emotional response to whatever was said or done or happened is, we relive that over and over again. And it is so pervasive, the way that it can just sink into us and make us relive the negative emotion. That's like putting, instead of it just happening to you one time, now it's happening to you 100 times. That is an exponential growth in terms of how that one moment hits you in a way that it completely, exponentially just harms you. Instead of it happening one time, it happens 100 times. Now do that with every negative thing that's ever happened in your life, all the things that we won't let go of, and just look at how that can exacerbate the difficulty that we experience in life. Whereas when we start to process in the moment and start to forgive in the moment, or very soon thereafter, and we don't hang on to those grievances, and we choose to be free of them, we choose to release, and we choose to forgive, then the reality is that we don't carry it. Only hits once and then it's gone. And we process it right through the body. I'll talk about some of this stuff in other podcast episodes, but I digress. This feels like it's gone on for a long time, but I'm going to just finish up here in another couple of moments. Ultimately, my purpose in sharing this story is to humanize me a little bit, because my experiences have really shaped who I am. I truly believe that if that accident that occurred hadn't happened, I really don't know who I would be today. I know that my worldview was really dramatically shifted through that experience, to say the least. I now look at relationships with so much appreciation and value. I really believe that the people that we have in our lives right now, the ones that we love, we should give them some big hugs today and say, you know what, I really love you, and mean it, and really mean those words. And not saying that we should live every day like it's our last. I don't want to put that fear-based approach or thinking out there. However, if we were to look at today and say, if this was the day where I got to say the things I truly feel, and I'm not waiting for a better moment or for tomorrow or waiting for some moment when I feel ready. If I was to live this day and really take it as an opportunity to fully, authentically express myself with love, and to let the people around me know that I really love them, and to go into work with a big smile on my face and really be there and show up with 100% of my energy or whatever I can muster today. Maybe today it's 60% or 65, but that full 65%, whatever it's going to be for you. If I was to look, I have 2 little kids. If I was to look at my kids and really like think, today is the day. If I only had today to actualize them, what would I say to them? What would I want them to remember? How would I treat them? How important would I make spilling a glass of milk or taking too long to put on the shoes? Is that what I would want to emphasize? Or would I instead want to emphasize, hey, I love you so much. You're amazing. I believe in you. You're an incredible human being. That's so creative. I love what you did there. Hey, accidents happen. It's just a little spilled milk. Let's clean it up together. What would I want to reinforce? Like, we have these choices and these moments in every single day where we get to really look at how we're showing up. And I am so passionate today about creating spaces for us to really look into who we are and to show up with that full authenticity. Because when we feel congruent, meaning when we feel in alignment between who we think of ourselves to be and how we actually show up in public and how we live our lives when no one is watching us, and the thoughts that we think align with the actions that we do and align with how we put ourselves out there in the world, there is this internal harmony and alignment that comes into being. There is almost a physical activation of peace that is possible. Peace being, I wouldn't change anything about this moment. I am very great. It's a peaceful, it's a perfect moment where everything is okay, even when it's not okay. Peace is a state that we can actually achieve inside of ourselves. And this is what I believe is possible for everyone. And so I really aim to create these spaces for people and create these opportunities for people to connect with this part of themselves, because I, for so long, went through my life searching for peace, striving after peace, searching for what I called the ground. And I remember being in another coffee shop. I think I'm seeing a theme here. When I was in my 20s, and I had done my yoga teacher training at this point. I was in my early 20s. I think I was 23. And I was reading Krishnamurti. Can't remember the name of the book offhand, but I'll find it and I'll put it in the comments or I'll put it in the description below for you. And he was the first one that I had ever read about who talked about this search for the ground. And I almost dropped my coffee, this bitter Starbucks coffee. And I remember in that moment just being like, there is somebody else who's been searching for the same thing I've been searching for. And that complete, up until then, this validation that my search was meaningful, because I wasn't the only person who was looking. I wasn't the only person who wanted to get to the bottom of their existence. I wasn't the only person who wanted to know what their purpose was and their meaning was, if there was any at all. There had been other people who had asked this question and who had persevered to find and discover and unearth the answer for themselves. I now truly believe that it's almost a remembering of why we're here, coming back to remember, like, what brought me here? If I chose to be here, why did I choose to be here? And now, and this, what is it that I'm here to do? And so that affirmation just struck me to the core. So this is why now in my life, I think my personal mission is always that inner connection with spirit and with self, and to really bring myself into alignment. That is the number one focus, is to be in alignment with what I know to be truth or consciousness, awareness, as it's unfolding from the highest awareness I can possibly conceive of in this moment. Can I listen to that highest awareness and live my life from that place? That is what I focus on every single day. And then that manifests in the world as me choosing to say, let me hold space for people. Let me create containers for people to 100% be able to feel and be themselves and know that they are worthy and enough just the way they are, simply for no other reason than because they opened their eyes this morning. They are worthy and deserving of love, of peace, of doing something meaningful with their lives, of being able to determine what that looks like, of being able to craft the direction of their life, knowing that they have their hand on the tiller, and to empower people to move their lives in directions that inspire them, that elevate them, that make them feel alive. So that's who I am, a little bit of who I am. That's what I'm about. And you're going to find out a lot more in the podcast to come. But thank you for tuning in. If you liked this, if you enjoyed this session, then please feel free to share this with somebody that you know. Please like it. Please leave a comment for me. Happy to respond to everybody, and wishing you the most beautiful, wonderful, magical day.